For several decades, Cesaria has lived a peaceful and prosperous existence. Across the land, praises are sung for the stranger, whose actions are responsible for the seemingly unending state of peace in the land. But another evil is about to rise from the dark depths of the underworld. Comets begin to fall from the skies. The ground itself starts to rumble, until one day in a fiery birth of molten lava, an island rises up from the ocean. The heat of this island is great, and none could approach it. But rumors of a castle on this island spread throughout the sailors. Orcs that had been absent for decades return, pounding on their war drums, attacking settlements and caravans. Pirates once again rule the seas, seizing all maritime commerce. Rumors are told of the great earth serpent having awoken from its slumber, and a mysterious name is whispered with fear: Exodus. Thus, with so many calamities and ill omens, Cesarians began to believe that the end of the world is nigh. Ultima 3 Exodus was released in 1983, 1 year after Ultima 2, with numerous improvements over the previous game. Instead of controlling a single character, you can now form a party of up to 4 characters. While the manual tells you that you can recruit new characters from the world, this seems to be untrue. There have been some changes to the character creation, but one thing remains the same. You need the manual to understand the rules and options for the character creation, since the game itself does not give you a list of classes or races you can choose from. And there are many more options now. You again name your character, choose your sex from male, female or other, and choose their race from a human, elf, dwarf, bobbit or fuzzy. The sex of the characters seems to have no effect on character attributes, whereas the races have a wildly differing attribute limits. For example, humans are the jack-of-all-trades selection, and all of their attributes cap at 75 points, whereas dwarves can become stronger but lack in intelligence. Instead of being limited to the 4 base classes of fighter, cleric, wizard and thief, there are now 11 classes, each of which has their own characteristics. For example, wizards can only wield daggers, wear cloth armor and use sorcery, but one of their multi-class counterparts, the Lark, can wield all weapons, only wear cloth armor and cast sorcery, but only with half the intelligence points a wizard can. This adds a certain level of strategy for creating your party. You can still choose to use only the base classes, which are the strongest in their specific fields of expertise, but are also severely limited in every other. Or you can use more multi-class options to have more characters wield the benefits of some categories while losing some strengths in another. Still, before choosing a magic-wielding class, it's a good idea to browse through the spellbooks that come with the game. Clerics and wizards have their own spellbooks, and these are important to understanding the spellcasting system of the game. The spellbooks give an explanation of each spell written in a style fitting an in-universe spellbook. They also show you the button required to activate the spell in the spellcasting prompt. The player no longer has to go into store to buy spells, but instead all spells are technically available from the very beginning. This means that spell use is not limited by the amount you can afford to buy, but instead by the amount of magic points the spell-using character has. These points regenerate over time and do not need to be replenished by the use of potions or such. After adding characters into your character registry, you can form a party. Forming a party is mildly clunky but functional enough. If you don't remember which character is which, you first need to check the character registry for the number of the character, return to the party menu, view that character, then remember all the numbers of the characters you want to use, go to the Form Party menu and insert the desired numbers there. Of course, at the start it's most likely you'll only have characters 1 through 4, and this ends up being an issue only if you create more characters and want to change them mid-campaign. After forming your party, you once again enter Cesaria, where it is up to the hero and their party to find out what is plaguing the land and how to stop it. The first step in this quest is to equip items to your characters. This is a great introduction to one of the improvements in the game, but also to its limitations. Each of your characters has their own inventory and equipment. There is no unified pool of gear, food, or gold. What there are, though, are buttons to pool the gold to one character and to transfer equipment and food from one character to another. Having a party with different strengths on each character also means that now, when you initiate almost any action, the game first asks you which character you wish to use. This, while understandable, does also get a bit tedious. For example, let's take the equipping of characters. First, you need to check what gear your character has. This is done by checking the stats of the character and scrolling down to their inventory, which, instead of opening up a new screen as in the previous games, now shows up in the text parsing portion of the screen at the bottom right. This, I feel like, is one of the more negative changes in the game. Then you have to press the Ready Weapon button, choose the character, choose the gear item, rinse and repeat to all the characters. While this system is in many ways a humongous improvement, in the sense that now the classes feel more meaningful due to their different strengths, and how the game allows you to take full advantage of these strengths whenever you feel you need them, the implementation has been done in a functional but ultimately not the most user-friendly way. Your journey will once again take you to several different settlements in search for clues and equipment. To help the player do so, the game comes with a map of the world where no settlements or points of interest are marked on the map itself, but many of them are named on the sides of the maps in the runic alphabet system first introduced in Ultima 2. Traversal itself is very similar to the earlier games, with the tiled overworld and town maps being presented in a top-down perspective. There is one change though, which is the introduction of a line of sight system, where solid objects such as mountains, tall trees, and walls block the player's view. The talking system is mostly the same as it was in Ultima 2, except now the characters can have longer strings of dialogue. This is very useful as the increased length means that some of the clues are much less vague this time around. The world is again full of various characters, many of which have nothing important to say, but their existence still makes the world seem more alive than it would feel without them. Tavern Keepers and the Oracle also return, and their function remains in essence the same as in Ultima 2. For a price, Tavern Keepers reveal clues on important topics you should keep an eye on during your travels, while also giving some information on new gameplay mechanics. The Oracle, on the other hand, returns with another expensive poem, which acts as a kind of mini walkthrough. Each pair of lines of the poem can be seen as a kind of quest that the player can use to guide them through the main story of the game. During your adventures, you're also going to be doing a lot of fighting. This is one of the biggest changes in the game, as now you have a party instead of just one character. The fighting is no longer just pressing A to attack, and instead, each encounter with an enemy puts your party into a separate combat screen. These combat screens are static arenas in which your party and the enemy party move with alternating turns. Ranged weapons can be used more effectively than in the previous games, and combat spells are no longer exclusive to dungeons and can be used in any battle. This combat style is reminiscent of tactics-style games, instead of the more menu-based combat systems that became popular in many of the later computer role-playing games. One more negative aspect of the new combat system has to do with the control scheme. You use the arrow keys to move your characters and to aim your attacks. Due to one feature, this puts you at a slight disadvantage, as the enemies can move and attack diagonally, whereas the player cannot. Experience from battles is not equally shared between the party, but instead is gained individually by the character that strikes the finishing blow to an enemy. This is admittedly a somewhat bothersome design choice, since to keep your party at somewhat equal levels, the player must do quite a bit of extra strategizing during battles to properly share the experience. Defeated enemies drop chests that can be trapped, and the character that opens them needs to do a trap disarm roll. Some classes are better at this than others. In the chests can also be new gear, which you can use for yourself or sell at various stores for some extra gold. Leveling up is also finally meaningful, as unlike in the previous games where leveling up did practically nothing except change the types of enemies seen and gear found in stores. This time, levels also affect the maximum hit points of the characters. Hit points are no longer bought from Lord British, but this time he bestows the party members an increase to their maximum health pool if they have enough experience points. As a replacement to the old healing system, party members slowly regenerate health. There are also healers who will restore the health of the party members for a price, as well as spells that do the same. Another new addition is the character status system, represented by a letter in the party view. The characters can now be in good condition, poisoned, dead, or turned to ashes. Poison, as you may expect, slowly causes damage over time until it's cured. Dead and ashes statuses prevent the character from acting, and only very high-level spells or expensive treatments are capable of bringing a character back from these status effects. Continuing your adventures, there are several places you are unable to access. To reach some of these places, the player needs to once more gain access to a ship. To get one, you need to wait for the pirates to attack you, defeat them in battle, and repurpose their old ship for your own purposes. The ships are no longer the super vehicle they used to be. The first large change is the addition of a wind direction system. Now your ship can sail in every direction except the direction from which the wind is blowing from. And in calm winds, the ship is completely unable to move. As such, sailing is now more time-consuming. The cannons of the ship as well are still useful, but not as much as before. They cannot be used to grind anymore, as firing upon an enemy disintegrates them, giving you no experience or loot. Another way to reach some otherwise unreachable places are the moon gates, similar to the time travel gates in Ultima 2, except these only move you through space. Each gate appears at a specific phase of the first moon and takes you to a gate designated by the phase of the second moon. Unlike the map in Ultima 2, there is no guide to these gates in the documentation, so the player needs to deduce themselves which gate is which. Now, with more access to the locations across the world, you're likely to collect clues about things called marks. Lord British as well will refuse to raise your maximum HP after a certain point until you present to him a Mark of Kings. These marks are a new mechanic where acquiring a mark to a character will give them special powers related to the mark. For example, the Mark of Kings allows the character to raise their maximum health, the Mark of Fire prevents lava from damaging the character, and the Mark of Force allows a character to pass through force fields. There is also a Mark of the Serpent, which is required to pass the giant snake protecting the island, from whence all the evil plaguing Caesarea emanates from. And to acquire these marks, the party must venture into the dungeons. The first thing you see is once again darkness, and to explore the dungeons you need either spells to create light or torches. Torches are no longer random drops from enemies but can be purchased from a special shop called the Guild. The Guild sells other useful tools to the intrepid adventurer as well. In addition to torches, you can purchase keys to unlock doors, powder to stop times, and gems that show you a bird's eye view of the location you're currently in, thus meaning you no longer have to murder innocent civilians to gain items you need to win the game. After stocking with supplies and lighting up a torch, you can see some changes that have been made to the dungeons. This time, the dungeons are in color, instead of being simplistic wireframe representations. The wandering enemies have been replaced with a random encounter system which, to me, is not the most pleasing change, as being suddenly taken from the front view to the combat view is somewhat jarring. Many things do not have a visual representation in the first-person view, but by using the overhead view provided by the magical gems, you can see each interactable square on the map. Some of these can be traps and some treasure chests. There are even fountains that can be drunk from, but this can be a dangerous risk, as a fountain can heal you, but it can also do you harm. But the most important thing to find are the marks. These are most often found at the very bottom of the dungeons, and even when you do find them, the marks themselves are not safe. Touching a mark will brand it to the character who touches it, but this also causes damage to them, making escaping the dungeon even more dangerous for an unprepared adventurer. Another important thing to find in the dungeons is the fabled Time Lord, who has a vital clue for the party. It is possible to feel unprepared to explore the dungeons thoroughly, as despite raising the maximum health of the characters, they have not become any stronger. This is because the attribute raising is once more hidden behind several clues. The attribute system in Ultima 3 is somewhat of a combination of the systems in the two previous Ultima games. There are now 4 shrines, each dedicated to one attribute. To raise a character's attributes, you need to journey to these shrines and donate 100 gold for each point you wish to raise. This, you can imagine, will be very expensive, especially if the player wishes to max out all the attributes for the characters. These shrines also act as your only way to receive some special items that are required to complete the game. Several sources in the world mention items called cards, and even their names. You're also told to search the shrines. This points to another new feature in Ultima 3. There is now a function called Other. This allows you to write a custom command to execute. Whenever a clue points you to one of these commands, the other command is marked in the dialogue, denoting there's something special about this word. The one problem the party has is that the shrines are not in Caesarea. Instead, to find the shrines, the party must venture into the hidden continent of Ambrosia. This is done by sailing your ship into a wandering whirlpool that moves around the seas. Thankfully, the whirlpool is also marked on the map shown by the magical gems, making finding it relatively easy. If the whirlpool finds your ship though, that will be a problem. As if the whirlpool happens to enter the same square as the parked ship, the ship will be destroyed, requiring you to find another one. The continent of Ambrosia itself is in essence a maze, which would be annoying to explore without the use of the magical gems. There are also several locked doors, most of which lead nowhere. The game does not allow saving in the continent, as technically it is considered an indoor area. This is likely because it's possible to get soft-locked in Ambrosia. There is only one way out of the continent, a whirlpool visible from the very beginning. But since the party's ship was destroyed during the trip through the whirlpool, a new ship must be acquired. Once you do acquire a ship, there is one locked door between you and Caesarea, and if you do not have a key, well, tough luck. At the very least, you have now learned where the inspiration for Sierra Softlocks came from. Returning from Ambrosia, there are still many things to do in Caesarea. From the very beginning of the game, it is possible to find clues about exotic equipment and a town called Dawn. Dawn is a magical town that only appears when both of Caesarea's moons are new. The specific location of the town can only be found by talking to a jester in Castle British, who is surrounded by a field of lava, thus almost necessitating the acquiring of the Mark of Fire before talking to him. Once you do find Dawn, you're given another command you can use with the other function, Dig. Unfortunately, this is where the clues about exotic equipment end, making this in my opinion worse than the quicksword in Ultima 2, even though that had absolutely no clues in the entire game. But at least for that, there was an NPC you could have an impulse to talk to, unlike with the exotics in Ultima 3 that are in two unremarkable spots on the overworld map, and where you have to use a specific command that's undocumented and only found from a town that's hidden behind several clues. With the party having been upgraded, wielding powerful weapons and armor, having found the magical cards, it is the prime opportunity to finally assault the castle of the mysterious evil Exodus. Who is Exodus? No one knows, but they must be defeated to restore peace to Caesarea. Even with the mark, the snake will not let the party pass. Instead, the party must once more follow clues to find out the last remaining piece of information to proceed, as only an invocation given by the gods themselves will open the path forwards. The final assault into the lair of evil is daunting, and also the home of one of the most baffling design decisions I've ever seen. After braving many dangers only passable with the use of the marks branded into the party's skins, they are attacked by the floor. Yes, the floor. I understand that the point here was to make an invisible enemy, but why name it the floor? These fights can be somewhat difficult, as you have to basically guess in which square the enemies are, and there's no indication of how many there are. The lack of diagonal attacks does not make this any easier, as the enemies can still attack you from squares you cannot retaliate to without moving. Through adversity, the party perseveres, finally reaching the lair of the enemy, the evil Exodus. Spawn of Minax and Mundane, the most horrible thing you've ever laid your eyes on. A punch card computer.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
After recovering from the shock, the party inserts the magical cards into Exodus. Preferably in the order the Time Lord mentioned, since inserting the wrong card into the wrong slot will kill the person holding the card. As the final card enters the diabolical machine, everything around the party begins to collapse. The evil is vanquished, but the future is left unclear. In Ultima 3, you can really see the template for computer role-playing games come into being. Many of the features and tropes of CRPGs are now in place, and the basic form for many games of the following decades has been set. The biggest problems I had with Ultima 3 were on two fronts. First is the story. While there is more content when it comes to solving clues and finding a way to defeat the final foe, actual story development is still quite lacking in the game itself. The premise of the story is still told in the manual, which is fine, but you learn practically nothing about Exodus or his motivations during the game. In that sense, the motivation to find the clues and beat the game are not driven by learning more about the world, but by the game being a game. And that's just what you do in a game. The second is the grinding, which is still a large part of the game. Having a larger party and making the attribute raising more expensive means that you need to grind way more gold than before, and it can be really time consuming. I'm sure the idea was that as you explore the world and slowly learn what to do and where, you'd be able to gain a lot of gold doing so, but from my experience, that's not even close to being enough. This necessitated farming specific dungeons for gold just because that was the most efficient way to do so. Otherwise, the game is quite enjoyable and does feel pretty good to play. The jank of the controls doesn't take too long to get used to, and exploring the world does feel quite rewarding. So, in conclusion, I'd say that Ultima 3 is a pretty good game. Even though it is still somewhat raw on many fronts, it is still quite fun to play if you really do enjoy retro games. Anyway, that is it for this time, and the next time I'll tackle the game that really sold me on the series. But until then, Fintrovert, signing out.